Hello, my name is Emma. At my own graduation dinner, my sister looked around the room and sneered, "She's just here for free food." Everyone laughed, except me. For years, I paid their bills, carried their debts, even funded her tuition. Yet in that moment, I was nothing more than a joke. How do you stay silent when your own family erases you piece by piece until you begin to wonder, do I even exist to them at all? I had always imagined the night of my graduation dinner as a kind of victory lap, the moment when the years of late nights, the jobs I juggled, and the sacrifices I made would finally add up to something tangible. Chicago's skyline was glowing against the darkening sky, the city lights shimmering like they were applauding me before anyone else could. From the rooftop of Skyline 360, the air smelled faintly of wine and roasted garlic, and the murmur of conversations floated around as my colleagues and professors settled in. I had chosen the place carefully, not just for the view, but because it felt like proof that I had climbed higher than anyone expected of me. And yet, even as I stood there, breathing in the crisp night air, I felt a knot in my stomach. My colleagues congratulated me with warm handshakes, professors clasped my shoulders with genuine smiles, and I smiled back. But inside, I couldn't shake the thought that my parents' arrival would change the entire mood of the evening. I heard my mother's words echoing from years past, dismissing my practical studies, always turning the spotlight back onto my sister, Calypso. I forced myself to breathe deeply. I told myself what Americans say all the time: success is the best revenge. Maybe tonight, with the city glittering around us, they would see me differently. Maybe they would finally acknowledge me, if only for one evening. I smiled politely, answered my colleagues' jokes, accepted another glass of champagne, but my mind kept circling back to one question. Will tonight finally be different? As I walked toward the reception table to check in, my optimism cracked. On the long white table lined with neatly arranged name tags, I spotted mine immediately, and my chest tightened. It read, Emma Tron. One missing letter, but it was enough to sting. Next to it sat my sister's tag in bold black font, Future Dr. Calypso Tran. The words glistened, embossed, as though the printer had known she was destined for greater things. I picked up my card slowly, staring at the misspelling, trying to convince myself it was an innocent error, but I could already feel the flush creeping into my cheeks. Around me, colleagues glanced sideways, then quickly looked away, the awkward silence sharper than if anyone had said something outright. Guess the printer had a long day, one of my classmates tried to joke, his smile sheepish. I laughed softly, masking the sting. It happens, I said, sliding the tag over my dress like armor. But inside, my voice was sharper. Why does it always happen to me, never to her? Calypso, of course, arrived just in time to see me pinning my tag. Her lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. "At least they got my title right," she whispered, holding hers up between two manicured fingers. My mother and father laughed politely as though the evening had already been won. I exhaled, steadying myself. I wasn't going to let a plastic tag dictate my night, but the symbolism wasn't lost on me. That piece of plastic didn't just say Emma Tran, it said, "You don't quite belong here, you never have." When the maitre d' appeared to escort us to our reserved table, I already suspected how this would unfold. The path wound between rows of clinking glasses and scattered laughter until we reached the center of the restaurant. The maitre d' gestured with a professional smile. My parents and Calypso were shown directly to the prime seats facing the skyline, with the best view in the house. Then he turned to me and motioned toward the chair tucked near the swinging door of the restroom. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd misheard. But no. He set my napkin down beside that chair, right next to where the scent of disinfectant, mixed with the aroma of roasted lamb, wafted out every time the door opened. I hesitated, glancing toward my colleagues. A few shifted uncomfortably, one even frowning, as though they too recognized the insult hidden behind the polite arrangement. I forced myself to sit down, smoothing my dress, my face carefully composed. Even tonight, I'm placed where I'm easiest to forget. Calypso leaned toward me, her voice low but sharp enough to slice through the moment. "At least you're close to the exit," she said, smirking, before turning her attention back to the skyline. The words landed with the precision of a blade. I clenched my fork, reminding myself of something I once read. Sometimes you have to stand alone to prove you can still stand. The dinner progressed around me with practiced ease. Guests chatted, laughter bubbled across the room, and yet my table seemed colder, the weight of subtle slights heavier than the night air. My father asked Calypso about her courses. My mother praised the sacrifices she was making to become a doctor. I chewed silently, my name never leaving their lips, the toilet door opening and closing at my side like a metronome of dismissal. I sat upright, my back rigid, eyes on the glowing city beyond the glass. Every time they celebrated her, I remembered another time from childhood, when family photos had been taken without me, when my efforts were erased in favor of her spotlight. I thought of the afternoons when I stood just outside the frame, invisible yet present. But tonight, I told myself, I wasn't that child anymore. I wasn't the forgotten background figure. I had earned my place here, and I wouldn't shrink to fit their version of me. I cut another bite of lamb, placed it on my tongue, and resolved not to cause a scene. Not yet. I would keep my mental notes, tuck away every slight like a receipt in a ledger I would one day present. If they think I'll just sit here quietly forever, they're wrong. Just then, the waiter stepped forward with a polished smile, holding up his hand to catch attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced warmly, "if I may have your attention for the first toast of the evening." The spotlight shifted toward our table, conversations dimmed, glasses were lifted, and I braced myself because I could already sense what was coming. The clinking of glasses rang out as the first toast began, a melody of celebration that should have warmed me. My professors spoke with pride, their voices steady, recounting the late nights, the study groups, the way I had carried others through classes that seemed impossible. My colleagues chimed in, applauding loudly, their smiles bright. For a moment, I let myself enjoy the swell of recognition, the warmth of words that reflected the years of struggle I had endured. I felt my shoulders relax, the tension in my chest loosening. Maybe, I thought, this was the night when everything would turn. But then the spotlight shifted. All eyes turned toward my parents, waiting for the natural crescendo, the words that would crown the night with the pride of a family finally acknowledging their daughter's accomplishments. The pause stretched, longer than it should have. My father cleared his throat, his voice flat. "She's always been a hard worker." The words landed heavy, devoid of affection, devoid of pride. My mother didn't speak at all. She lifted her glass, took a slow sip, and let her eyes wander to the far side of the room. The applause dwindled into a silence that pressed down like a weight. I stared at my plate, my pulse drumming in my ears. Sometimes, silence cuts deeper than words ever could. Across the table, my colleagues' smiles faltered, their faces turning cautious, almost embarrassed on my behalf. A guest leaned to another and whispered, "Aren't they proud?" The question floated like a dagger in the air, and though it wasn't meant for me, it pierced. I forced my lips into a smile, steadying my voice as I joked, "They've always believed actions speak louder." A few chuckled politely, but the discomfort lingered. I knew my colleagues had seen enough to understand. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. It had been laid bare in the silence of my parents' indifference. Then, as though to puncture the fragile veil of composure I tried to maintain, Calypso rolled her eyes. She leaned back in her chair, smirk tugging at her lips, and whispered loudly enough for several to hear, "Well, at least she's not crying about it." Her laughter was soft, cruel, and dismissive. Heat flared across my chest, but I swallowed it down. I remembered an old saying, "You can't get blood from a stone." I could spend a lifetime waiting, but no matter what I achieved, they would never give me what I longed for. That night, I understood with brutal clarity, their validation would never come. I glanced toward my colleagues, their faces etched with discomfort. I gave them another smile, though inside, despair gnawed at me. This wasn't just indifference. This was a deliberate choice to diminish me, to strip away what little recognition others offered. The sting deepened as memory carried me back to a conversation from earlier in the week. One of my colleagues had approached me, confusion in her voice. "I didn't see your name on the invitation. Was I missing a page?" I had frowned, unsure what she meant. She handed me the glossy invitation card she'd received. Across the top, bold letters proclaimed, "Celebrating future Dr. Calypso Tran." Beneath, the details of the dinner were written clearly. My name was nowhere to be found. Only later, after I asked, did I learn my name had been added to a follow-up email, hastily tacked on as though someone had realized the oversight at the last moment. The words of another guest echoed in my head. "Oh, I thought your sister was the graduate. That's how the invite made it sound." Now, as I sat at the table, my father leaning in toward Calypso, my mother gushing loudly about the elegance of her dress, I felt the revelation sink deeper. This wasn't just about a toast. It was about a pattern, years in the making, an erasure so practiced it was nearly seamless. When people erase you long enough, you start wondering if you were ever really there. I looked across the table at my family. My father nodded approvingly as Calypso described her latest course load. My mother's face glowed as she spoke of how demanding medical school was, her voice carrying so others could hear. They didn't glance at me, not even for a moment. I sat straighter, studying them as though I were a stranger seeing them for the first time. The realization came quietly. I couldn't control how they chose to see me, but I could control what I allowed them to do to me. I gripped my glass tightly, the stem pressing into my palm, a silent anchor. I wouldn't cause a scene, not tonight. But my mind sharpened, my patience thinned into steel. I resolved then and there that their silence would not define me forever. The waiter reappeared, balancing trays as he brought out the next course. The clatter of plates on the table seemed louder than before, the atmosphere colder. My fingers tightened around my glass as I forced myself to smile, to breathe. This was only the beginning. The weight of the silence after the toast hung over me like a heavy coat I couldn't shake off. Around us, other tables buzzed with laughter, glasses clinking, forks tapping against plates. At my table, though, it felt like the air had thickened, heavy with what hadn't been said. My colleagues, trying to soften the blow, forced polite smiles, but I could see the strain at the corners of their mouths. Even their laughter was too quick, too forced. I sat there, my hands resting neatly in my lap, the stem of my glass trembling faintly between my fingers. It's strange how the loudest part of a room can be the silence, I thought. That silence screamed louder than any cruel word could have. My heart told me something sharper was coming. I had learned over years to read the currents of my family's moods, and I could feel it. The next cut was already on its way. I excused myself quietly, slipping away under the pretense of stretching my legs. I walked past a row of decorative palms, placed to create a barrier between the dining space and the hallway leading to the restrooms. That was when I heard it. My mother's voice, hushed but distinct, speaking to a woman I recognized as one of my professor's wives. "Calypso is the real pride of our family," she said, her tone smooth, almost rehearsed. "Emma just works with numbers. Nothing extraordinary." The words stopped me mid-step. I froze behind the broad leaves, my breath caught in my chest. My mother's voice carried the same tone she used when complimenting a fine wine, dismissing the ordinary to praise the exquisite. The woman she spoke to hesitated, then offered a polite but uneasy reply. Well, numbers can be hard too. Not everyone has the patience. My mother chuckled softly, brushing the comment aside. It's not the same. Medicine requires true sacrifice. Calypso will elevate our family name. Emma, well, she's done fine. Practical, you know. Nothing worth bragging about. I stood rooted in place, each word carving into me, not invisible, dismissed, reduced to nothing more than a ledger, a calculator, a shadow in someone else's narrative. I thought of a saying I'd once read. It's not the stab in the back that kills you. It's turning around and realizing who's holding the knife. My chest tightened. The betrayal wasn't shouted. It was whispered, slid into casual conversation like poison slipped into a glass of water. I pulled in a long breath, steadied myself, and forced my feet to move. Returning to the table, I sat down without a word. My colleagues' chatter dimmed as the lights lowered and the screen at the far end of the rooftop came to life. A video montage began, showcasing the graduates. I straightened in my chair, anticipation flickering. This was the moment I could lean into, the evidence of my work, my long nights leading study groups, my consulting internship, my triumphs. The first clips rolled. Smiling graduates, snapshots of lab work, debates, celebrations. Then my face appeared. 2 seconds, a slide gone almost before I could blink. It cut abruptly to Calypso, her pre-med journey painted in glowing images. Her in a lab coat, her name in bold on a mock medical diploma, smiling in photos surrounded by professors. The reel lingered on her for minutes, accompanied by applause from nearby tables. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "Was that it?" The question barely reached my ears, but it was enough. My parents clapped enthusiastically, proud smiles stretched across their faces as though the video had been made just for them. I kept my hands in my lap, my fists pressing into my thighs. My nails dug crescent moons into my skin, but my face remained neutral. I would not give them the satisfaction of watching me falter. From beside me, Calypso leaned in, her perfume sweet and cloying. Her lips curled as she whispered, "Guess they know who the real star is." She sat back, basking in the applause. I clenched my jaw, forcing down the anger that roared in my chest. They're rewriting history right in front of me, erasing me piece by piece. The montage ended, the lights came back up, and the conversations resumed. But I felt hollow. I glanced around the table, mentors who had watched me carry others, colleagues who had leaned on me during exams, and they had all just witnessed my erasure. I drew in a breath, long and steady, and scanned the room again. All of them had seen what my family wanted, Calypso crowned, me clipped out of the frame. When people dismiss you enough times, you start to wonder if staying silent is a kindness to them or a cruelty to yourself. The thought pulsed in my mind, clearer than the music playing faintly in the background. A decision solidified in me. Tonight could break me, or it could awaken something I had buried too long. I wouldn't let this pass, not forever. The waiter stepped forward with a microphone, announcing the next speaker. Calypso rose gracefully, smoothing her dress, her chin lifted high. I narrowed my eyes, my breath steady. I knew the night was racing toward a breaking point, and my patience was nearly gone. The clatter of cutlery softened as another guest rose with a glass in hand. His voice carried across the rooftop, warm and deliberate. "To Emma," he began, smiling kindly at me. "I've watched her push herself harder than anyone I know, balancing work, studies, and still finding time to help others. That kind of perseverance doesn't just happen. It's character." A flicker of warmth spread through me, fragile but real. For a moment, I let myself believe my family might echo the sentiment, might finally nod in agreement, and let me bask in a little light. I glanced toward them, waiting. But my father's voice cut in smoothly, redirecting the current. Calypso is really the one carrying our family's name forward, he said with an approving nod toward her. My mother followed without hesitation. Medicine is a sacrifice. Business is just numbers. Emma did well, but Calypso will change lives. The sting hit quick. The guest faltered, glass half lowered, his eyes darting toward me with an awkward apology written across his face. Other guests shifted in their seats, some offering me small, sympathetic looks as though they had been forced to witness a crime. I sipped my wine slowly, swallowing more than just the drink. They can't even let me have a single compliment, I thought. My chest tightened, the bitter taste not from the wine, but from their relentless need to shrink me in front of others. Another guest tried to save the moment. But Emma's achievement is remarkable. An MBA from this school is no small feat. My father chuckled, waving the words away. Sure, but anyone can study business. Medicine saves lives. My skin prickled. Anyone? Then why did I work 2 jobs? Why did I bleed through nights with study groups, carry classmates on my back? Calypso leaned in, her perfume strong, her voice syrupy. Don't take it personally, Emma. They're just telling the truth. I inhaled, keeping my face composed, though my voice came out steadier than I expected. Truth? Or the version of truth that keeps me small? The words lingered for a second. No one at the table answered. The moment passed quickly, as though it had never been spoken, my family pivoting back to Calypso with ease. I sat in the echo of my own words, realizing again that here, every compliment handed to me would always be twisted into a dagger. Later, when I was asked to give a short thank you speech, I stood, adjusting my dress, and faced the room. My palms were warm, but my voice didn't shake. I spoke about my professors, my classmates, the long nights that had tested me but never broken me. I thanked the mentors who had guided me and the colleagues who had leaned on me. My words were simple, steady, heartfelt. But as I looked across the table, I saw it. Calypso's smirk. She tilted her head, exaggerated an eye roll, then leaned toward our parents, whispering something that made them chuckle quietly. To everyone else, it was invisible, but to me, it was a neon sign of disdain. That smile. It wasn't amusement. It was dismissal. I pushed forward, my speech finishing on a note of dignity, though inside I felt my chest burn. Guests clapped politely, but I barely heard them. My eyes had fixed on that smirk, and in that moment, I understood something deeper. To them, this wasn't my celebration. It never would be. I sat down, the chair cool against my back, my hands folded tightly in my lap. My heart pounded with restrained fury, but I recalled a line I had once read. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. I whispered it silently like a mantra, though I wasn't sure yet what winning would look like for me. I studied my family, their faces glowing with easy laughter, as though the night had belonged to them all along. A realization pressed against me like a tide. They would not stop unless I stopped them. Leaning slightly, I whispered under my breath so softly only I could hear. They think I won't fight back. They're wrong. The cracks in my silence were showing. The anger that had been layered for years no longer sat quietly. One more slight, I knew, and I wouldn't let it pass. The waiter returned, clearing plates, announcing the next course with a practiced smile. Calypso leaned closer, her lips already parting, her tone poised to be louder this time, designed not just for me, but for everyone to hear. I steadied myself, shoulders squared. I knew the next words out of her mouth wouldn't just be whispered, they would be public. And when they came, They would burn the last bridge between us. The atmosphere had grown heavier since my short speech. Though I had spoken with composure, though I had thanked my mentors and colleagues with sincerity, the chuckles and smirks from my family had already left a mark. I could feel it in the way the table shifted, the way conversations nearby carried on as if nothing was wrong, while at our table silence hovered like smoke that refused to clear. Waiters moved with precision, setting down the main course, the soft clatter of plates, a thin cover for the tension. I tried to focus on the aroma of roasted salmon, the buttery scent rising in the air, but my stomach was tight. I knew Calypso. I knew when she leaned back in her chair, twirling her stemmed glass between her fingers, that she was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Around us, guests filled the silence with small talk. "Beautiful night," one said. "The view's incredible." Another laughed about the city traffic. Their voices blurred. My senses stayed locked on the undercurrent at my own table. Sometimes it's not strangers who humiliate you. It's the ones who know exactly where to cut deepest. I braced myself, but still, I wasn't prepared when Calypso spoke. During a pause in conversation, she raised her voice, her tone light and cutting. "She's just here for the free food." The words landed like glass shattering. The laughter from nearby tables stopped. A wave of silence swept across the room, eyes turning, faces stiffening in disbelief. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Across from me, one of my colleagues whispered fiercely to another, "Did she really just say that?" I sat there, stunned, humiliation flooding me. Professors who had sung my praises minutes before now glanced at me with pity. My friends shifted uncomfortably, caught between anger and shock. This wasn't a jab in private. This was a slap in front of an audience. Calypso smirked, sipping her drink, her gaze sharp with satisfaction. She knew exactly what she had done. Her eyes met mine, daring me to react, savoring the attention she had redirected toward herself. My chest burned, my face hot. But I inhaled slowly, forcing composure onto my features. My silence cracked inside, but on the outside, I straightened my back, met the stares of the guests, and held still. The waiter returned to pour more wine, his expression strained, as though he wished he could disappear. Guests across the room tried to recover the celebratory mood, but whispers continued. My humiliation was now public property. Then, before I could gather myself, my father leaned closer. His voice was low enough to sound intimate, yet pitched just enough to be heard by those nearby. "So, Emma, when will you finally settle down? A family, kids, or are you just going to keep chasing degrees?" His words were a twist of the knife Calypso had driven in. My mother followed, her voice soft, but meant to sting. "Calypso already has everything lined up. You should think about what really matters." I set my fork down carefully, the metal ringing faintly against the plate. I could feel eyes on me, professors, colleagues, acquaintances, all drawn into this display. Some looked down at their plates, embarrassed for me. Others glanced between us, waiting to see if I would break. Inside, my thoughts raged. They want me to be small. They want me to be ashamed, dependent. They can't stand that I built myself without them. I swallowed, tasting bitterness more than food. I thought of something I had once read. Sometimes you realize the cage was never locked. You just forgot you could leave. My hand tightened around my glass. I lifted it slightly, the reflection of the city lights shimmering in the wine. I let my voice be steady, measured. Some people chase degrees. Some people chase respect. I'll settle for the one that lasts longer. The words landed with a ripple. Guests chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or applaud. I saw a few smile at me with quiet admiration, impressed that I hadn't broken under the weight of my family's cruelty. Across the table, Calypso's eyes narrowed. The smirk she had worn so easily slipped into a scowl. She hadn't expected me to answer, not like that. My mother pursed her lips, my father leaned back, and for the first time that evening, their confidence faltered. Inside, I felt something shift. I won't let them bury me quietly anymore. The table settled into an uneasy silence. The weight of what had been said lingered in the air, pressing down on us all. I set my glass down carefully, steady, knowing this wasn't over. And in that quiet, I recognized it. Retaliation was coming. The waiters moved with efficiency, clearing plates with quiet precision as the hum of conversation around the rooftop dipped. At my table, the pause was louder, heavier than the clatter of dishes. I noticed the way my family exchanged glances, tiny cues passed between them like secret notes. My chest tightened. I knew something was coming. Insults in public are wounds you don't forget. But tonight, they're not just wounding me. They're testing how far I'll bend. I leaned back in my chair, steadying my breathing, reminding myself not to give them the reaction they wanted. Professor Odessa leaned closer, her voice low but clear, her hand brushing my arm with a kind of steadiness only she could offer. Emma, you deserve this night. Don't let them take it from you. I nodded, grateful for the small affirmation. It settled me just enough, but the storm was still coming. I could feel the air changing, charged like before a clap of thunder. The waiter approached again, this time not with food or drinks, but with a slim, leather-bound folder. He set it carefully in the center of the table, his eyes trained on neutrality. Then he stepped back. My father reached for it almost lazily, flipping it open with the entitlement of someone who had already decided how this moment would play out. Without even glancing at me, he nudged it across the table with 2 fingers until it sat directly in front of me. His voice was calm, casual, but it cut through the table like a blade. You've got this, right? After all, it's your party. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The audacity of it, after years of covering their debts, after paying bills that weren't mine, after sacrificing for Calypso's tuition, it landed heavier than I thought possible. The table froze. Colleagues who had been halfway to lifting their forks stopped mid-motion. Their eyes darted between me and my father, comprehension dawning. Professors looked bewildered. Friends who knew bits and pieces of my story now saw the full picture laid bare. Heat rushed to my cheeks, but my voice, when it came, was calm, steady. I placed my hand over the bill folder and spoke clearly. Interesting. I hosted the dinner. I paid the deposit. And still, you think this moment belongs to you. The silence that followed was sharp, unrelenting. Inside, my thoughts roared. It wasn't just a bill. It was proof. Proof that to them, I was only an ATM. My father's smile was thin, his eyes warning me not to go further. My mother sipped her wine as if nothing had been said. Calypso smirked, clearly savoring the discomfort around the table. The humiliation sank deeper because it wasn't private. It was witnessed by every guest I had invited. They hadn't just dismissed me. They had forced the world to see how little I mattered to them. And yet, as the burn of anger rose, it didn't consume me. It sharpened me. Moments later, the photographer entered the room, calling for a group picture to commemorate the evening. People began rising from their chairs, laughter returning in scattered pockets. My parents and Calypso stood quickly, slipping into the center of the forming group, their smiles bright and easy. I walked forward, ready to take my place, but the photographer hesitated. His eyes flicked down to the clipboard in his hands, scanning the names. He looked up, awkwardness plain on his face. I don't have you listed for this one. Confusion rippled through me. What do you mean? I'm the graduate. Before he could answer, Calypso stepped in smoothly, her voice laced with venom disguised as sweetness. Oh, we already have enough for the family picture. She gestured toward herself, our parents flanking her like a completed set. You understand? My stomach dropped. It hit me then, with brutal clarity. They weren't just erasing me with words anymore. They were erasing me visually, as though my existence had never belonged in the story they wanted to tell. Behind me, I heard one of my colleagues mutter under their breath, anger cutting through the whisper. "This is unacceptable." I forced a thin smile, though inside I was trembling. I would not give them the tears they were waiting for. My body went rigid, my face composed. When they erase you from pictures, they're not just erasing the moment, they're erasing your existence. I stepped back deliberately, away from the group. The flash of the camera went off, capturing the perfect picture of a family that pretended I wasn't there. I whispered to myself so quietly that only I could hear, "This is the last time they get to write me out." The fury inside me no longer begged for recognition. It crystallized into resolve. Tonight, their cruelty had stripped away the last of my illusions. I was done being the daughter they could exploit and erase in the same breath. I returned to my seat, my glass trembling slightly in my hand, but my heart steadier than it had ever been. Then Calypso leaned across the table, her smile sharp as glass, her voice raised just enough to carry across the room. "Don't take it too hard, sis. Not everyone was meant to shine." And in that instant I knew. The fight I had avoided all my life was finally unavoidable. Guests trickled back to their seats after the photo session, their hushed voices carrying fragments of what they had just seen, or rather, what they hadn't seen. My absence in the family picture had not gone unnoticed. I caught the sidelong glances, the murmurs at nearby tables, colleagues leaning into each other with questions that hovered between disbelief and sympathy. For the first time that evening, I realized the erasure wasn't just my private wound anymore. They had pulled everyone else into it. Professors who had praised my leadership hours earlier now looked at me differently, their admiration tinged with pity. I felt my chest tighten as the truth landed. It wasn't just me they erased. They made everyone else a witness to my disappearance. The silence at our table was thick, heavier than the skyline sprawling brilliantly beyond the glass walls. Every clang of a fork, every scrape of a chair seemed amplified in the absence of genuine warmth. My father avoided my eyes, my mother poured herself more wine, and Calypso reclined with a smile that didn't belong to joy, but to conquest. I clenched my glass, grounding myself. The unease pressing down on me was sharp, but it wasn't despair anymore. It was something else, an edge of anger waiting to cut through. It was Professor Odessa who broke the stalemate. She had been quiet most of the evening, observing, her kind eyes tracking the way I shrank and expanded with each humiliation. Now she leaned forward, her voice steady but resonant. "Emma is the reason half your classmates passed finance. I've rarely seen a student with such resilience." The room reacted instantly. A ripple of applause spread through the guests, polite but genuine, the kind of acknowledgement I had craved from my own family. My throat tightened, gratitude mixing with something bitter, as Odessa's words filled the air my parents had kept empty. My father chuckled awkwardly, his voice stiff as he waved a dismissive hand. "She's always been diligent, nothing more than that." But Odessa wasn't finished. Her chair scraped against the floor as she rose, her gaze locked firmly on my parents. "I cannot stay at a table where her own family refuses to honor her." Gasps erupted. Silverware paused mid-air. Conversations halted. A mentor leaving the table was no small act. It was a public rebuke, one that seared hotter than any of my family's words. I felt my breath catch. Part of me was grateful, so profoundly grateful that someone had finally said aloud what I had been screaming inside all my life. Yet another part of me burned with humiliation, that it took an outsider, not my own blood, to defend me. Sometimes it takes an outsider to say what you've been screaming inside all your life. The air shifted. My colleagues looked at me with respect, my family with stiffened backs. Odessa left, her footsteps fading, her absence louder than her presence had been. Calypso, however, wasn't one to let silence hold. She burst into laughter, clapping her hands once as though amused by the spectacle. "Well," she said brightly, her voice cutting through the tension, "if it wasn't for me arranging this dinner, none of us would be sitting here." Confusion rippled through the guests. Murmurs rose, eyes turning toward me, toward the woman they knew had coordinated every detail. I lifted my chin, meeting her gaze. "Really? Then maybe you'd like to show the invoice with your name on it?" My voice was calm, the kind of calm that made people listen harder. Color rushed to her cheeks, but she didn't falter completely. "You just paid the deposit, sis. I made the connections. I put this together." Her lie sprawled across the table, flimsy and brittle. Inside, my thoughts sharpened. Lies are like makeup. Apply too much, and everyone sees the cracks. And indeed, the cracks were showing. Guests whispered, some shaking their heads, others smirking knowingly. They weren't fooled. Calypso's attempt to take credit exposed her desperation more than it diminished me. I let a thin smile curve across my lips, my eyes never leaving hers. "Funny. The manager knows who signed every check. I wonder what he'd say if I asked him to step over." Her smirk faltered. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting anywhere but mine. The weight of the moment hung, stretching taut, the air trembling with anticipation. Around us, forks tapped nervously against plates, the sound thin and frantic. Guests leaned forward, sensing the tension boiling. I sat back, my hands steady around my glass, my voice low but firm as I thought to myself, they built their empire of lies on my silence. But silence isn't my weapon anymore. Calypso's face darkened. She leaned across the table, her words a venomous whisper meant for me, but loud enough for others to catch. "You'll regret embarrassing me." I didn't flinch. My glass stayed steady in my hand, my eyes locked on hers. Calm, waiting, ready, because I knew the next strike was coming, and it wouldn't just bruise, it would try to break me. The silence that followed Calypso's last jab was unbearable. Forks clinked nervously, chairs shifted, but no one at the table spoke. My colleagues looked at me now, not with admiration, but with unease, as if they weren't sure how much more of this I could take. My patience, however, had reached its end. I leaned forward, resting my palms flat on the linen tablecloth. My voice came calm, measured, but it cut through the murmurs with a clarity that turned heads. "Since there seems to be confusion," I said, scanning the faces at the table, "let's clear it up with facts." The surrounding noise dimmed. Guests who hadn't been paying attention now turned toward me. I could feel every eye in the room settling on my chair, waiting, the city lights beyond the glass frozen in the backdrop like a stage. If I don't speak now, I'll never escape the role they trapped me in. I unlocked my phone, my fingers steady as I tapped through the folders I had prepared long before tonight. Receipts, transfers, invoices, they had lived on my phone like silent witnesses for years. I lifted the screen so the glow lit my face. "Here's the payment for this dinner," I said evenly, scrolling until the manager's confirmation appeared. "Signed by me. Here's the tuition I covered for Calypso." I turned the phone so the table could see. Gasps fluttered across the guests. "And here," I continued, my voice rising slightly, "is the mortgage assistance I wired for Mom and Dad." The evidence lay in plain sight, undeniable. Numbers, names, signatures. A professor covered her mouth in shock. One of my colleagues muttered, "My God." Another nodded, almost relieved, as though the truth confirmed what they had long suspected. My internal voice was steady, almost cold. "Paper doesn't lie." Their empire of lies crumbles in the face of numbers. Across from me, my father's complexion paled. My mother's fingers tightened around her wineglass, but she said nothing. And Calypso, her smirk faltered for the first time that night. The air thickened, at its peak, a strange mix of vindication and dread. Guests shifted in their chairs, caught between witnessing justice and intruding on something too raw. Then Calypso snapped. She slammed her glass onto the table, the sharp crack jolting the room. Wine sloshed over the rim, pooling red against the white cloth. Her voice pitched high and shrill. "She's twisting everything! She only did this for attention!" The guests recoiled, startled. A colleague of mine whispered under his breath, "Classic gaslighting." Calypso's face flushed crimson. "She's jealous," she shouted, pointing at me. "Jealous because I'm the one who deserves this spotlight." I met her eyes calmly, my voice soft but clear. "Spotlight?" I let the word linger, then tilted my head. "I didn't pay your tuition for applause. I did it because you begged. And this is my thanks?" Her jaw clenched, her body trembling with fury. Around us, the guests murmured louder, their whispers growing sharper, sympathy turning visibly toward me. Some shook their heads at Calypso, others narrowed their eyes with open disapproval. Inside, my thought was sharp, resolute. The more she shouts, the clearer her guilt becomes. Calypso's words tumbled over each other, desperate, frantic. "She's making herself look like the savior. None of you understand what it's like being me, being expected to succeed, to be perfect." But her voice cracked, and the performance fell apart. I rose slowly, steadying the stem of my wineglass in my hand. My chair scraped against the floor, the sound deliberate, drawing silence back to the table. "Consider this the last time you exploit me," I said, each word distinct, carrying across the hushed restaurant. "You wanted to erase me. Now I erase myself from you." A collective whisper burst across the room, guests leaning into each other, the weight of my declaration undeniable. My parents sat stunned, my father's lips pressed into a thin line, my mother's hand frozen mid-gesture. Calypso's face twisted in rage, her whole body trembling. Inside, I felt no rage, no trembling, only clarity. I didn't burn the bridge. They drenched it in gasoline. I just lit the match. The restaurant seemed frozen in that moment. Even the city lights beyond the glass felt muted, as though Chicago itself was listening. I set my phone down on the table with finality, the evidence still glowing on the screen for anyone who doubted. I looked my family in the eye and said, "This is only the beginning." The room remained taut with unease after I laid my evidence bare, and Calypso erupted in denial. My family sat stiff, their faces drained of color, anger simmering just below the surface. Conversations at neighboring tables turned into whispers, eyes flickering toward us, then away, like witnesses unsure whether to intervene or simply observe. For the first time that night, I felt the heaviness shift. It wasn't crushing me anymore. Instead, it seemed to settle squarely on them, my parents, my sister, while I breathed steadier, my back straighter. For once, the truth wasn't just mine to carry. They all saw it. My colleagues no longer looked at me with pity. Their eyes held something sharper now, respect. A few of them gave me almost imperceptible nods, quiet acknowledgments that I had taken back what was mine in front of everyone. That recognition carried me forward, each breath steadier, each thought clearer. The tension slowed, thickened into something almost unbearable. Yet in that stillness, I felt something new, bitter relief and a readiness for closure. I reached for my purse, fingers brushing against the envelope I had carried all evening, tucked away like a silent weapon. Pulling it out, I placed it gently on the table, the paper crisp in my hands. My voice, when I spoke, was low but deliberate, carrying across the silent table. "This," I said, sliding the envelope forward, "is the last check you'll ever cash in my name." The sound of it hitting the table seemed louder than it should have been, echoing in the silence. My father's eyes narrowed, confusion flashing before fury took its place. My mother stiffened, her lips tightening into a hard line. Calypso's face flushed deep red, her jaw working as though she might spit venom on the spot. I didn't stop. "I'm done paying for your comfort. I'm done being erased while funding your lives. This ends tonight." Murmurs swept across the room, soft at first, then bolder. A few guests nodded, some even let out quiet sounds of approval. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances, realizing they were witnessing not just a family fight, but a fracture that could never be mended. Inside, I thought, the strongest walls don't fall with a scream. They crumble with a whisper of finality. I leaned back, exhaling. The envelope stayed in the middle of the table like a verdict no one could appeal. The stillness stretched until a voice broke through, not mine, not my family's, but a guest emboldened by what had just unfolded. A woman I vaguely knew from my program's alumni network looked at my parents, her tone clear, steady. "Why are you treating her this way? She deserves recognition." The words landed with the force of a gavel. Silence followed. My parents glanced at each other, panic flickering beneath their practiced masks. My father muttered, "It's not what it looks like." "She's exaggerating." My mother glared at me as if looks alone could undo what had been revealed. Calypso hissed angrily, "This is all twisted. You don't understand our family." But the weight of the question remained, unanswered. Guests at nearby tables shook their heads, some leaning back with open disapproval. The sympathy that had hovered uncertainly earlier shifted entirely to me. And in that shift, my parents visibly lost something. Social standing, respect, the illusion they had worked so hard to maintain. When outsiders call you out, the shame burns hotter than any family feud. That moment crystallized something deep within me. I wasn't isolated anymore. My truth had been spoken, seen, validated by others. The prison of invisibility had cracked, and I was walking free. I sat back, inhaling deeply. My heart no longer begged for their approval. It beat with something steadier, stronger. I used to think recognition was oxygen. But tonight, I learned I can breathe without them. I looked around the room, at professors who had vouched for me, colleagues who had stood silently but understood, even strangers who had now witnessed my dignity reclaimed. For the first time, I felt free. The envelope sat on the table still, a symbol of everything I had endured and the line I had drawn. I reached for my purse, sliding the strap over my shoulder. The decision was final, weightless in its certainty. I rose slowly, the chair scraping against the floor, and picked up my glass one last time. My voice was calm, almost gentle, as I said, "Enjoy the evening. It's the last one we'll share like this." I turned to leave. Behind me, Calypso's venomous whisper cut through the air. "You'll regret this." I didn't turn back. My steps carried me forward, and the silence they left behind told me everything about who they truly were. The silence after my declaration hung heavy over the table. The envelope lay untouched, stark against the white linen, like a final verdict no one dared to challenge. My parents looked stricken, their cheeks pale beneath the restaurant's golden light. Calypso sat rigid, her lips pressed tight, fury practically radiating from her face. Around us, guests whispered in disbelief, some shaking their heads, others exchanging looks that confirmed what I already knew. Nothing about this could ever be undone. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. I wasn't the one shrinking anymore. My professors caught my gaze and nodded, silent affirmations of respect. My colleagues leaned subtly toward me, not away, as if their posture alone could show allegiance. I held that moment close. For years I begged for their approval. Tonight I learned it's worth less than my own self-respect. The restaurant itself felt divided, half the room standing with me in their quiet way, the other half watching the wreckage of my family's silence crumble in real time. I rose slowly, not with anger, but with the kind of certainty that draws attention without a raised voice. The scrape of my chair was enough to still the few forks that had begun to move again. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I said evenly, my eyes sweeping the room. "I wish my family had seen me the way you have." I folded my napkin neatly and set it on the table, a gesture as deliberate as a seal on a document. I picked up my purse, sliding the strap over my shoulder. My father's voice broke the stillness, low and hard. "Sit back down, Emma." But I didn't pause. I didn't even look at him. My steps carried me forward, steady, purposeful, each one louder in my ears than the last. I was never their daughter. I was their provider. Tonight, I resign. A smattering of soft applause rose behind me, hesitant at first, then growing, as though others felt compelled to mark the moment for what it was. My family sat frozen, trapped in the silence of their own making, while I walked toward the elevator, head high. Later that night, when I pushed open the door to my apartment, the stillness inside greeted me like a bomb. But my phone shattered the peace before I even set down my bag. It buzzed relentlessly, lighting up the darkened room with notifications. I sank into my chair by the window, the city's lights stretching endlessly outside, and unlocked the screen. "Father, you embarrassed us. Fix this by paying the bills tomorrow." "Mother, how dare you humiliate us in public?" "Calypso, you're ruining my future, you selfish bitch!" Message after message scrolled up, angry words pouring into the void they thought I still occupied. I scrolled slowly, my face calm, my pulse steady. Then, with deliberate care, I archived each thread, deleting them one by one. Watching their names vanish from my inbox felt symbolic, like lifting chains from my wrists. They wrote me out of their story long ago. Tonight, I chose to erase them from mine. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to respond, to defend, to explain. Their voices no longer held power over me. I poured myself a glass of wine and carried it back to the window, settling into the chair with the glass balanced in my hand. The city stretched out before me, indifferent, sprawling, alive. "Chicago doesn't know or care about my family drama," I whispered to myself. "And that's the beauty of it. The city reminds me I can start again." I sipped slowly, savoring the quiet. A saying came back to me, one I had read in a book years ago, but never fully understood until now. Sometimes you win simply by walking away. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Tonight, I had cut the last tie that bound me to their control, and in the emptiness that followed, I discovered something new: peace. I set my phone face down on the table, refusing to check it again. The screen went dark, leaving me only with the lights of the city and the faint hum of life outside my window. "Tomorrow," I whispered into the night, "I start a new chapter, one they'll never control." The morning sun crept into my apartment, soft light spilling across the floorboards. I woke up feeling hollowed out yet strangely lighter, as if I had peeled away a skin I no longer needed. My body was exhausted, my throat dry from hours of restraint the night before. But my chest felt freer than it had in years. Chicago at dawn was different from the glittering skyline of the rooftop. The city stretched wide and unbothered, indifferent to the drama of one family. Cars hummed faintly below, the L rumbled in the distance, and the smell of coffee from the cafe across the street drifted up when I cracked the window open. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. Dozens of unread messages glared back at me, notifications stacked like a wall. I didn't open them. The silence was loud, but not oppressive. Peace doesn't come from silence, I thought. It comes from choosing not to let the noise in. In the kitchen, I measured coffee grounds, the mundane rhythm of the task grounding me, the hiss of the kettle, the steam rising, the warmth of the mug in my hands. It was ordinary, and yet it felt like a ritual of reclamation. A knock at the door startled me. When I opened it, Serafina stood there, her face still etched with traces of the night before. She held a small package in her hands. "This was left behind," she said gently. "Professor Odessa asked me to bring it to you." Inside the plain envelope was a folded piece of thick paper. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The handwriting was unmistakably Odessa's, steady, graceful, deliberate. "Emma," it began, "you are one of the most intelligent, resilient, and compassionate students I've had in my career. You didn't just succeed for yourself, you carried others along with you. Some families raise children, others raise providers. You were both, and you survived. Now it's time to live for you." My eyes blurred. Tears I had denied myself at the dinner finally came, soft and steady, slipping down without shame. Serafina placed a hand on my arm. "They don't define you. We saw you. The world saw you." I inhaled shakily, wiping my cheek, and managed a small, grateful smile. For the first time, I believed that. We sat quietly for a while. No need for more words. The letter lay open on the table like proof of something greater than blood, proof that recognition could come from truth, not from obligation. After Serafina left, I lingered with the letter, rereading it until the words etched themselves into me. My mind traveled back through the years, the nights I stayed late at work to send money home, the birthdays where my name was forgotten in speeches, the photographs where I stood just outside the frame. Each moment had been another brick in the wall they built around me. But last night, I had taken a sledgehammer to it. I used to think leaving family meant losing everything, I thought. But maybe it means finding myself. Eleanor Roosevelt's words surfaced from memory. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I whispered them aloud, as if speaking them cemented them inside me. I picked up my journal, flipping to a blank page. The pen moved easily as I wrote out what I wanted now. Not for them, not to prove anything, but for myself. Career growth, travel, friendships that lifted me instead of drained me. A life defined by my choices, not by being the scaffolding for someone else's dreams. By the time I put the pen down, the page was full, my future mapped not as an obligation, but as a possibility. Later that morning, I wrapped a scarf around my shoulders and walked to the flower market down the block. Stalls burst with color, tulips, roses, lilies, and I chose the brightest bouquet I could find, sunflowers standing tall in the center. Carrying them home, I felt the weight of them not as a burden, but as a promise. Back in my apartment, I placed the bouquet in a vase by the window. The flowers caught the light as the city pulsed beyond the glass. I lifted my coffee mug, breathed deeply, and whispered to my reflection, "I'm proud of you." The words echoed softly, but they carried more power than all the silence of the night before. They may never change, but I did, and that's enough. I slipped on my shoes later to fetch the mail. At the bottom of the stack sat a thick envelope, its typewritten label formal, legal-looking. My pulse quickened as I held it in my hands, the weight heavier than the others. I paused, frowning, my heart beating faster with the certainty that the story I thought was over was not finished yet. The envelope sat on my kitchen table like a stone. I turned it over once, twice, the official seal unbroken, its corners pressing into my palms. Morning light streamed through my window, catching the edge of the paper as if daring me to open it. I finally slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the thick stack of documents. I read the words slowly, though my stomach already knew what they said. Legal language bound me to debts I hadn't created, credit lines my parents had opened in my name, loans I had co-signed years earlier under the illusion that helping them was my duty. My jaw tightened. Even now, they planned to keep me chained financially. They wanted my future to remain their safety net. I laid the papers flat, pressing the edges against the table until the creases disappeared. Instead of despair, I felt something sharper: resolve. This wasn't just betrayal, it was my chance to sever the last cord. By noon, I was in my lawyer's office, the city buzzing beyond the tall windows. She scanned the papers, her brows knitting together. "They've used you long enough," she said firmly, looking up. "You're doing the right thing." I nodded, signing where she pointed. Each stroke of the pen felt like untying a knot that had strangled me for years. "They thought they'd keep me forever as their bank," I murmured. "But today, I cash out of this family." We filed the motions. To remove my name from obligations that weren't mine. To block future accounts from ever being tied to me. It was cleaner, stronger than walking away from the dinner. It was emancipation on paper, undeniable, irreversible. When I left the office, the air outside tasted different, cooler, lighter. I walked slowly, the city alive around me, people hurrying past, unaware that I had just closed a chapter of my life. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The bouquet I had bought yesterday stood tall on the sill, sunflowers catching the last streaks of light. I let the glass rest in my hand as I imagined the scene back at my parents' house. My father shouting, my mother wringing her hands, Calypso pacing in circles, her voice high and panicked about tuition bills now exposed as her own responsibility. The thought didn't bring joy, it brought release. I turned toward the glass and caught my reflection. For years I had looked and seen only a daughter begging to be seen, a woman reduced to an extension of other people's needs. Tonight, I saw something else. Calm, strength. A woman who walked away. "I am enough," I whispered aloud. The words didn't tremble. They settled in the room, solid and unshakable. The reflection held my gaze, not as a plea for approval, but as a declaration of freedom. That image, more than any document or argument, was the closure I had waited for. Later, I opened my journal and wrote, not about debts or family, but about the life I wanted to build. I listed goals, career milestones I would reach for myself, travels I had postponed too long, friendships worth nurturing. For the first time, the page wasn't a list of responsibilities. It was a map of possibility. I added one more promise. Each year, on this date, I would buy myself flowers, open a bottle of champagne, and whisper words no one else had ever given me. It wouldn't be about their absence anymore. It would be about my presence. Forgiveness isn't always about them. Sometimes it's about letting yourself stop bleeding. When I closed the journal, I felt fully detached from the cycle that had bound me. No more invisible daughter, no more provider, just me, whole, unclaimed, powerful. I rose, carrying the empty wine glass to the sink. At the window, Chicago pulsed with light, sprawling and alive. My reflection merged with the city behind me, both strong, both unyielding. "Consider me gone," I whispered, "and I'm never coming back." And with that vow, I finally cut the last thread they ever held over me.